Daniel Fahrenheit multiplied Romer's scale by 4 to have freezing at 30 degrees and human blood at 90. I said human blood there because that's what I actually found in the literature on this. And this was kind of the initial step that Fahrenheit took to get from Romer's scale to the modern Fahrenheit scale. We're going to interpret that human blood as meaning the human body temperature. I'm not going to try to interpret whether or not that means that Daniel Fahrenheit was a vampire. He made the adjustments, though, from those numbers to 32 and 96, respectively. And the reason he had for that was because that creates an interval of 64, and 64 is 2 to the 6th power, and that would be easier to engrave a scale by dividing the full interval in halves 6 times. And Fahrenheit was actually an instrument maker, so this was kind of that very practical level of thinking that he applied to this. So again, he just kind of tweaked the scale a little bit, and he's saying therefore that 96 is what he originally defined the human body temperature to be. With those new numbers, Fahrenheit determined boiling to be 212 degrees, and so the perspective on this is that that was something he did experimentally. Given that today the human body temperature is generally around 98.6, did Fahrenheit determine the boiling point to be too high or too low? So the thing that we're exploring here is, since he was saying 96 is human body, 212 is boiling, the 212 we've retained today, but obviously the human body temperature that he established doesn't agree with the modern established values, so there's obviously some experimental error that happened there. If he had done things correctly, what would the boiling point, one could argue perhaps that would mean that that's what the boiling point in Fahrenheit would be today. It wouldn't be 212. So kind of this question is actually answering for us, where did these numbers 32 and 212 come from? Because the 32 really comes from this adjustment that Fahrenheit made for the purpose of being able to make the instrument more easily, and the 212 came from experiments after that we're now arguing were flawed. So the way I'm going to look at this is, let me write down some of the numbers. I'm first going to write down the numbers for, I'll just put modern here for the modern Fahrenheit scale. I've already got all the numbers for starting from the Romer, which is again not something used today, but I've got Celsius and Fahrenheit still up there. But I want to look at the modern Fahrenheit and start with by writing down the number 32 corresponding to freezing, and then in modern days the established human body temperature is 98.6. And of course, boiling is 212. And then maybe I'll write here original. So in other words, what numbers did Fahrenheit originally intend? Well, he intended for these for these first two numbers, 32 was definitely intentional and stayed that way. But he intended 96 for human body temperature. And in that sense, the question we're really being asked here is, if his experiments had been correct, following what we understand to be correct today, what number should he have had here? Really, though, we're only being asked whether that number should be higher or lower. And I think it's pretty clear that this number, whatever it is, should be lower than 212. And that means that his original determination of the boiling point was actually too high. So having stated all that verbally, I'm just going to write on the board here that my answer to this question is too high, and save myself the trouble of finding what this number actually is, although one could do that by taking these first four numbers as a set of ordered pairs and coming up with a linear relationship as we've done in the last two examples, and then plugging in, maybe if the modern values were x, plug in 212 for x, and then out should pop the answer to this question. But again, we don't need to do that to answer what's actually being asked. And it looks like we got it correct. It was too high. And here it's been provided for us. So if you do want to go through the exercise of finding that number, you can check your answer. It apparently is 204.973.